We rise from the ashes, roots in the ground, rooted and resilient, power in our speed.
Hello, and welcome back to the Rooted and Resilient Voices podcast, where we create space for honest stories, healing, and unstoppable faith. I'm your host, Jasmine Rush, and I'm excited that you're here today. Today, I have the honor of sitting down with another woman of faith who embodies what this community is all about, Lacinda Swen. Lacinda is a licensed therapist, writer, and group facilitator who is passionate about helping individuals heal from relational wounds and create thriving, healthy relationships with themselves, their loved ones, and their community. She integrates faith, mental health, and trauma informed care to support individuals on their journey to wholeness and empowerment. With a compassionate and gentle approach, she creates a safe space for people to explore their stories and take meaningful steps toward healing, hope, and deeper connection. Lacinda, welcome to the Rooted and Resilient Voices podcast. Let's get rooted.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for taking up your time today. I read a little bit of your bio and the great work that you're doing in this space. You've committed your life's work to helping others heal from relational wounds. What inspired you to become a therapist, and why was integrating your faith a part of your practice?
Ooh, I love this question. For me, I really believe that my journey began before I even knew what therapy was. As a young child, I just had this curiosity about myself, about the people around me, and just, why people were wired the way that they were. I was curious about, the dynamics of my family. And so I was that child that would check out books from the library about body language, and I would take personality tests, and I just had this desire to understand people and understand myself. And so that translated into a journey of pursuing, psychology and then social work. And ultimately for me, it's rooted in a desire to hold space for others to heal. And I found in my own journey just how powerful going to therapy was. And then when I experienced therapists who wove faith into the therapy journey, that just brought an even deeper level of healing because faith is foundational to my life. I'm a Christian, and God just is the anchor of my life. And so I really believe that all healing flows from Him. And, just being able to be in spaces where therapists could speak, yes, to that emotional or mental side, but also to the spiritual side and bring them together was just very instrumental in my healing journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Did you ever encounter or experience resistance internally or from others about blending faith and therapy? And how did you reconcile those two?
Yeah, I think that growing up in the family that I did, there was definitely, um, beliefs around what therapy is. I've definitely experienced, hearing about the stigma when it comes to mental health. And um, I think for me internally, I had questions about what does it look like to be a therapist that can work with anyone, can create safe space for anyone, but still be aligned to my values. And so I think in my journey, that's something that I'm still navigating. But what I have loved is that those questions have allowed me to learn and be curious. And when I have clients that welcome that faith piece, or they've expressed that that is a value to them, it just adds a beautiful layer to our work. And I welcome bringing that into the space.
I love that, creating a space where you can be dynamic and mix and serve. others well. In many Christian communities, mental health has often been misunderstood. Why do you think some people still hesitate to seek therapy, even while being deeply rooted in faith?
Yeah, so kind of like I was sharing, in the last question, I think that there can be stigma, there can be misinformation out there, or just, beliefs that if I, go and pursue therapy, like what does that say about me and my trust in God? Does that mean I have a lack of faith? Does that mean I don't, believe Jesus can heal? And so I think that that can be like a hindrance for people or like a barrier. And I think that's something that I'm glad to see that there's more Christian therapists like taking up more space and like bringing awareness to us as a collective about the power of, combining faith and therapy, and that these things are not in competition with each other. They're not at odds, but it's a tool that God can use, right? Just as, if we were to, someone was to, get an injury and go to the doctor, we would call that wise, right? We wouldn't say that they lack faith. We would still pray for them, but we would
Absolutely.
call that wise, right? And so
Yeah.
same thing with going to the gym, right? Like we recognize that we have to steward our bodies, that we have to take care of our health. That doesn't dismiss the fact that Jesus is the ultimate healer and that our health comes from him, but we recognize that we have to steward, this gift that he's given us. And so I think it's the same thing with therapy, that it's actually a step of not just faith or courage, but a step of like stewardship and wisdom as well.
Love that you brought stewardship into the picture. Stewardship is something that people tend to only think of as it relates to money, but there's so many facets to stewardship and the importance that it brings in the life of a believer, depending on where they are in their walk of life. How do you explain the difference between spiritual health and emotional health? And how do they complement each other?
That's a great question. So I believe that, we are three-part beings: mind, body, spirit. And so when it comes to spiritual health, um, that can look like our faith walk. That can look like, how we relate to God. It can look like, our beliefs about God and our faith, and even the way that we engage in community, like for a Christian, like in church, things like that. All of those things can nurture our spiritual health. That's not an exhaustive list, but those are some things. And then as it relates to emotional health, that can be like, how do we name, how do we process, how do we identify our emotions? What is our capacity to emotionally regulate when we experience emotions? What are our beliefs around our emotions? And so I do think those things are complementary because, like I said, we are mind, body, spirit, and these things are interconnected. And so, us having a greater level of emotional health helps us to have a greater level of spiritual health, right? Like in the Bible, it talks about the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience. Like we know the rest, right? But how can we exercise those things if our emotions are all jacked up? How can we be patient and loving? How can we have self control if we are not willing to do the work to become more emotionally healthy, right? And so it's very directly linked to our spiritual health and us operating in the way that Jesus has commanded us to do in the Bible, right? Love God, love others as yourself.
I love that, man. I want to touch on so many things you just said, but I have more questions. As a trauma informed therapist, what are a few tools or truths that you find helpful for someone beginning their healing journey?
That's a great question. So I believe that safety is paramount when it comes to therapy. Like you said, I am a trauma informed therapist, and what I have found in my work, previously I worked with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, childhood family violence. And what I have found is that before we can do any deep work, we have to establish safety. Before we can start getting to the root of things, we have to have trust. And so I really believe that in therapy, that trust and safety in a relationship is like primary focus at the beginning. Because if the person I'm working with doesn't trust me, or there's no safety, how are we going to talk about some of the most vulnerable and intimate things in your life, right? And so I believe that it's not an overnight process as well, right? It's a very vulnerable thing to come and sit with someone who's a stranger at first and then talk about the most vulnerable parts of your life. And so that trust and that safety is an ongoing, evolving, dynamic process. And so I don't rush when it comes to therapy. Healing is not something we can rush through. So I really believe in slowing the pace down. A lot of times when people come into therapy, maybe they've been in survival mode, they've had to overfunction in some ways, underfunction in some ways. And so there can be this sense of rush that we can have, or an impatience to get well quick. And I get that. There's no shame in that. But healing is a process, right? And even when we look at the way that God operates with us, it's a process. And so, some of us may have that like altar call moment where they pray for you and, yes, yay, you receive your healing, but there's still a process that has to be walked out to maintain that, right? There's still more layers to it. And so some of the things that I kind of hold as we're opening up the space of therapy is that this is a safe space where you can be vulnerable, you can be messy, show up as your authentic self. It's going to be a relationship of building trust, right? And just that permission to take.
I love that you said a couple of things. You create an environment of safety and trust. And when you create the environment of safety and trust, then you can begin to go deep. But you don't rush it. You don't sit somebody on your couch and say, in 1 hour, all is going to be well, knowing that they've walked through whatever it is that they walked through in life. Them things could have been extremely hard, as you mentioned. It could be different, a different type of trauma, but trauma isn't something that can be rushed. And I love that you touched on that. Let me ask this question. So, if I'm not yet ready to deal with the depth of my trauma, but I'm curious about seeking therapy, what could one do there? What does that look like?
Great question. So what I'm getting from you is like the person is curious, but not yet ready to talk about the depths of their trauma. I would say that one, you're not alone, right? And I would also say that that person is still, they can still experience a lot of benefit from coming to therapy, right? Because ultimately, therapy is your space, right? And so I really welcome people to let me know, what is it that you are seeking to get out of this, right? Some people, it will take months or even years before they process certain things, and that's okay. For others, they may want to just explore and learn about what therapy is, ask questions or look at resources online or read books. There's a lot of great books out there that can be helpful, just to even kind of explore what is therapy, what could be the benefit of it, or what can healing look like. I am a big believer that therapy is one way of, act like one vehicle for healing, right? But there's many, many, many ways that we can heal. And so, I would say give yourself grace to explore, give yourself grace to look things up, to be curious, right? And also, recognize that just because you enter into the therapy space does not mean that in like 1 to 2, 3 sessions that now you need to unpack the heaviest parts of
I know for my own testimony, I had been to therapy like a few different times with a few different therapists. And my most current therapist, I went in and day one, it's like, pew, it just, whatever was there, it just came out.
it.
So
Yeah.
the therapists before, they were great in their own ways, but like this one therapist, uh, who I'm keeping I'm keeping held close for right now. I would say like the the trauma informed care that this therapist used to help me get where I am today, man, is such a blessing.
Mm.
And it was that skill set that really brought out the, okay, I'm not gonna be gross. You get
Yeah,
what I'm signaling here, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's also happens for many people as well, where it's like the sense of relief, like finally I have this safe person or this safe space to just share it all. And, you might notice that the therapist will create space and hold that, but still then they help set the pace, right? It's like we're now gonna kind of decide like together, what do we want to focus on first, or what's going to help you feel safe in this space. And so it's like affirming that, desire to just like to share and like, you know it's like I'm finally seen, right? I've experienced that too in my own therapy journey as well. I just you want to affirm that.
Thank you for affirming that, ma'am. What does what role does storytelling play in relations to healing from relational wounds? And how can believers begin to explore their story without fear or shame?
Yeah, I think storytelling is so powerful. As humans, we are storytellers. Like if you're with your friends and we're sharing about, what's happening in our world, like we're all telling stories. It's how we have connection. It's how we make meaning of the world. It's, the way that we tell a story dictates how we even look at our past, the emotions that come up for us around the past, right? Or if we're going through something in the present, the story that we have about that thing can change the way we experience it. So stories are powerful. I believe that, they can hold our patterns, our beliefs, right? They can also hold the way in which we relate to the world, to the others around us. And for the believer, I would say that sometimes, I wouldn't say this is true always, but sometimes there can be a fear that if I look back at the past, right, that if I speak about the things that have happened, maybe that shows a lack of faith, or maybe, like we need to just focus on the good, we need to just be positive, we need to just, claim victory. But I believe that looking back at the past is not so that we get stuck there, but it offers insight into our present. It offers insight into things that could be playing out in our current reality, in our relationships, in our homes, in our workplace, in the way that we relate to people in the world around us. And we look back with curiosity because it helps us have understanding, right? It helps us to have understanding, and then we can work on those things, right? I also believe that God redeems our stories. And so when we can look back and invite him into that process, we can even begin to explore like God's fingerprints on our story. We can begin to explore where was God in the midst of maybe some challenging or uncomfortable or even traumatic situations, right? And I believe that God does not look at us through the lens of shame or condemnation. He looks at us through the lens of grace and of love. And so we can adopt his lens when we look back at the past. We can adopt his lens of compassion when we look back at the past, because shame actually doesn't help us to heal, right? Like, the tough love, that whole kind of, operating, it doesn't help us to actually make lasting change. And so if we can practice, looking with curiosity, with compassion, with grace, that actually has the power to help us to create meaningful change in our present reality.
I love that. I love that response, and I have nothing to say. You help people build healthy relationships with themselves, their community, and others. What does a Christ-centered, emotionally healthy relationship actually look like?
Yeah, that's a big question. And so I think there's many things that it can look like, but I'll touch on some things. For me, some things that come up are grace and responsibility. I believe it also looks like, empathy and communication, and it looks like us stewarding ourselves and also the people that that have been entrusted to our care. I believe it looks like, following in the footsteps of Jesus. How did he relate to people? How did he love them? How did he have compassion with them? Being able to accept people where they are, right? Meaning that we can love people without placing all of the weight of all of our unmet needs on them, right? That doesn't mean that we have no needs, because needs are healthy. We all have needs, but we can love people out of the place of our identity being rooted in Christ, right? And being filled up with his love. And we can see other people as children of God, right? And even in the way that we express our needs, or the way that we communicate, or we repair, or we forgive, or we pursue reconciliation, it looks different than, when we kind of operate from a place of emptiness, or a place of, I am using this person to meet like needs inside of me that I have not tended to.
So on a side note, just to derail the conversation just a
I
tad,
love that.
I was watching a TV show called Smothered,
Okay.
and it's about mothers who smother their daughters, and like they're very much so overly involved, and they don't give them space to grow or develop like their own personality, like they're only like built around that parent. And I thought it was a very interesting TV show I've been watching for quite a little bit. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, that sometimes you need a little bit of space, and that's okay, because how else do you develop your own sense of self and not overly rely on someone else's response or someone else's thoughts to frame your own healthy relationship. Um, I know there's a balance to that,
Mhm.
and a little bit of a duality to what I'm saying, but I just think it's really important to have healthy boundaries
Mm,
and not be overly dependent. So that just came to my mind as you were having this thought about an emotionally healthy relationship. It's like, is that healthy to
yeah.
like dress like my mom as an adult and run every single thing I do by my mom? Is that healthy? Would you say that was healthy? I'm just curious. This is a throw off.
Well, I think you kind of said the answer, right? That, you know, that is not really a healthy model. But I also want to, actually, it's so funny because I was on Instagram today and I saw a therapist talk about this. He wasn't talking about this show, but he said that often parents who, he didn't use the word smother, but I'll use it for this conversation, smother their children, or they are overprotective. They were, those parents were children that were underprotected. So in maybe the effort of like, I want to correct from my past, we might then overcorrect, right? And so that is also why I am like so excited about this area of therapy and mental health, because when we're able to get curious, right? Like if we just stop at the space of like, is this right or wrong? There's like nowhere to go, because it's like, okay, like then what do I do? But if we are able to get curious of like, what makes this person operate this way? Like what beliefs are they operating from? Is it like self protection or trauma, right? Or, yeah, like pain that is actually at the root of that behavior. And if we could have a compassionate witness, to kind of explore that, maybe we can soften some of the ways that we relate then to our family member, to our child, right? Or other people. I love that you said boundaries, because Boundaries are such a big part of healthy relationship. Also, Jesus modeled boundaries so well in the Bible. And sometimes as Christians, people can think, oh, like I should just give and give and give. I should just love, 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 no boundaries. But in order to have healthy love, healthy relationship, we need boundaries. And boundaries are not about controlling other people or just cutting everybody off, but it's how can I stay in connection, in relationship in a way that honors myself and honors you. And so, coming back to the motherhood conversation, it's like before we can learn new behavior, sometimes we have to kind of get compassionate and curious about what is kind of going on internally for this mother that's creating, this kind of like codependent like pattern of parenting.
I'm a very curious individual. Like, I want to know why things work.
Yep.
But I'm not an engineer, right? But I love learning about how things work and why they work. So I love that you talked about being curious. And if you think about it, right, like curiosity really is an invitation to just dig just a little bit deeper into whatever the topic is, right? And so yeah. Okay, we wrapping up here. Got just a few more questions. What do you wish more Christians knew about therapy and trauma recovery?
Wish that more Christians knew that one, seeking support for your mental health is not a sign of lack of faith, like I said before. It is actually a very courageous step. It's actually stewardship, like I said. I also wish people knew that the behaviors or um, the things that we do as a result of the trauma that has happened, that oftentimes people are really just doing the best they can with what they have and the information that they had at the time. And so if we can begin to look at people at, from the lens of instead of like what's wrong with you to like what's happening for you or what happened to you, then we can look at them through a compassionate lens, right? Through the lens of grace. I also wish that people knew that it's a process. It's not overnight. God, like I said before, is a God of process. And so, even if we have that moment of healing that, happens at the altar that feels like it happens in an instant, there's still a process we have to walk out. And therapy can be a vehicle for that process, right? We can begin to explore the things underneath the surface where we can also practice some of these relational skills, right? Because therapy is a relationship. So when you're, advocating for yourself in the therapy room and expressing, this is what I would like to focus on, or actually you suggested this tool, but like that doesn't work for me, right? Or, even this time of therapy works for me or doesn't work for me. All of those things are practice, right? They could be corrective experiences that then you can take out into your life, right? And you can begin to explore and practice those with the people, with your loved ones, with the people around you. And so, yeah, it's an invitation to deeper healing. God can work through therapy. And it's not a sign that you lack faith, but I think it's actually a sign that you're serious about your faith. You're serious about healing. You recognize that there's deeper work to be done.
I like that you mentioned about being serious about your faith and serious about your healing because I think just specifically in my own experiences, I can't speak for other people's experiences, but some of the practices that I did practice, you know, on the side of like, I'll just pray about it and I'll just thank God about it, were not healthy for myself or the other person, right? And so I think it's really important to think about tools and how you can use tools. Everything that you think of as a tool is a tool. And if you use it appropriately, like it helps you. I've heard many people say that therapy is, not necessarily for them. And I get that. You find the tool that works well for you. But I would say, like in my own journey, therapy has been a great tool that I've used to walk down like significant levels of trauma. And now I'm able to communicate about it in a way and be healthy in relationships in a way where I show up um, caring, concerned, but also healed, not 100%, right? But healed enough to help in the journey of someone else, maybe walking through something similar or something a little different where my insight just might be just a tad different. So I really appreciate that you said that. What would you say to a woman listening who's been strong for everyone else, but she doesn't know she needs healing?
So I would say to her, first of all, I want to just affirm and recognize the challenge of feeling like you're in a space where you have to be the strong one or you have to be the caretaker. I want to just affirm and recognize that that is a very challenging space to live in, right? And it comes with a weight that can sometimes be invisible to the people around you. And what I would also want to say to her is that I also see that, or I want to say that I recognize that you're doing the best you can with the tools that you have, the information that you have, and the space that you're in. And I want to kind of like create some space to share with her, an invitation to consider, that perhaps there could be another way of doing life, right? And that can be hard to even hold. And so I just want to invite her to just hold this thought, just consider it, right? You don't have to do anything with it, but consider that perhaps there is a different way of living in which you can actually be supported and cared for as well, in which your relationships can be mutual and reciprocal. And I want to say to her that you are worthy of that you are worthy of being seen, of being valued, of being heard, of the things that you are carrying being acknowledged. And I also want to say to her that God sees you. And not only does God see you, but He wants to meet you in this space where you're carrying so much. And He has endless capacity for the things that you're carrying. And He would love to shoulder them with you, to carry you in this season. I also want to say to her that God delights in your rest. It actually brings Him joy to see you experience rest, to see you be supported and cared for. And that if, maybe this is the first time that you have heard something like this, that maybe this is a sign or a clue that there could be another way, that there could be a life in which you are not just the roles that you occupy, but you also are valued for who you are, just existing without doing anything, right? We are human beings, we are not human doings. And so your worth and your value is inherent to you, even if you were to not do another thing. And I also, lastly, would say to her, you know, perhaps, whether you're ready for therapy, that could be a space, or even if it's just safe community, a space where you can explore if, perhaps part of my identity has been connected to my doing, my overgiving or my overextending or overfunctioning. Sometimes that can be connected to our identity or our trauma or our pain. We could have this belief that in order to be loved, I have to earn that. In order to be valued, I have to do and I have to take care of people. And I want to offer you just, a little bit of like hope and light and encouragement today that you can be loved and you're worthy of being loved just as you are, regardless of what you do for other people.
That's so good. You're worthy. What does it mean to be rooted and resilient in your professional practice, your personal faith, and your daily walk?
For me, being rooted is about being rooted in God. For me, that is my foundation. That is my, that is my core. That is what anchors me in this life. And so for me, in order to be rooted, in order to be resilient, that is kind of how I have to align my life, right? Is operating from a place of belonging in my, being loved by God, being, created, being His child. So I'm rooted in that, and then the resilience piece is that I can experience hardship or challenges or difficulty in life, and I can bounce back because I am carried and anchored by God, by my faith, but also my community, right? I've experienced in my life that, having that relationship with God first and foremost, and then healthy community, it allows you to go through some of the greatest challenges of your life and not be crushed by those challenges when it would make sense to be crushed, but to be able to bounce back from those challenges or to um, walk through them with faith or with grace. It doesn't mean you're not walking with a limp. It doesn't mean that there's not a deeper level of healing that has to occur when you go through something hard, but you're not alone in it. And so I think for me, that's also just so connected to why I'm a relational therapist, is because community is so vital. And so for me, that's kind of connected to being rooted and resilient. It's, anchored in God, it's connected to healthy community, and that allows me to even be a better therapist, honestly.
I love that. I loved all your touch points there. Before we go to our final word, would you like share with people how do they connect with Lacinda? Like, how does one connect with you if they're interested in therapy and they're just curious to start this journey? How would they reach out?
Absolutely. Um, Firstly, you can find me, the practice that I work at is called Araya Hope. So our website is arayahope.com. So you can find me there. Online, you can find me at Therapy with Lacinda on Instagram. And either of those spaces are a great way to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for that. Last and final question, and we really thank you for your time today and just sharing your heart with us. Will you speak a word of encouragement or a prayer over a woman listening who is afraid to ask for help, um, but knows that she has something going on, she's not okay, and she may need it?
Yes, I would love to speak a word of encouragement to her. I want to just again affirm that, being in a space where you are needing help or support, but maybe there's fear there, right? Or wondering if the people around me will actually care or can they support me, or, even questions of where do I get help? I just want to affirm and recognize that. And I would love to say to you that, one, you are worthy, again, of being supported. You are worthy of being heard, right? And I want to say to her that God can meet you in your emotions. He can meet you in the secret place. He can meet you in the places that maybe are even too scary to vocalize right now. And you know, he is with you in those moments. I also am, praying that God will send you your helpers. He will send you people who value you, who will listen as a safe witness, who will walk with you through your journey. And that will also begin to heal the parts of your heart that maybe have been occupied by fear because of maybe past betrayal or pain or moments where people could not meet you, right? So I would like to say to you that um, you taking up that space, you're valuable. There is more to your story. And I believe that if you're listening to this and maybe there's something kind of stirring inside of you, that that can be a sign for you that there is more to your story. Your pain does not get to define your whole life. Um, and there are people out there who would love to love on you and to walk with you. And if it's too scary to hold hope for that right now, in this moment, I'm holding hope for that for you. And I'm speaking that life over you, that God will bring those people who will allow you to kind of get to an even deeper part of your healing. And yeah, you're worthy. That's kind of the biggest thing I want to say to you.
I love that you are leaving the listeners with "you are worthy." So we want to thank you again, Lucinda, so much for coming out and being a part of the Rooted and Resilient family. We'd love to have you back at some point in time. And again, thank you so much for being here today. May God bless the works of your hands.
Thank you so much, Jasmine.
You are most welcome.